Hello, everybody. What is up? This is Alex here. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel, where the Chargers bounced back from a two-game losing streak that contained some of their uglier games of the year and ultimately get back to 4-2, still in first place in the AFC West with a share of the lead with the Broncos, but have the tiebreaker over them. So, all things considered, I thought that this was a nice bounce-back game. There's plenty of negative stuff we'll talk about, both on the offensive line as well as the defense, but also some positive signs and positive momentum for this team. Obviously, there's no other natural place for me to start other than the otherworldly performance of Justin Herbert, who went 29 for 38, 264 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 112 passer rating. Probably not his flashiest game that I'm going to remember 10 years from now, or as Jim Harbaugh said, until they pour dirt over me. But the one thing to me I will remember is, again, Justin Herbert has dealt with the subpar circumstances. I put out a tweet where it was like, he's got Bobby Hart and Austin Deckle as a tackle. Defense kind of stunk that final drive. Again, they give him 46 seconds. He's on his third and fourth running back. QJ's not in the game. The offensive line situation is what it is. And Herbert still makes it work. And I think that was a big moment, obviously, for him to get the ball with 46 seconds left and make something out of nothing for what the Chargers offense had been, in the drop back passing game and asking, Herbert to do a lot, which kind of was confusing because they had a lot of success, particularly in the third quarter with a lot of the quick time stuff. But it was, hey, got to have it moments for Justin Herbert, and he came up huge. I thought, obviously, we'll get to the play that he had on second down to Ladd McConkey in a second. The first down play where he is, sacked in the backfield and drilled by, 3 or 4 guys, some missed assignments there. The Chargers don't protect particularly well. Great play sneakily on that one to get the ball away and just throw an incompletion, because if Herbert takes a sack there and it's 2nd and 17, 2nd and 18, I think that I'm coming on this podcast today talking about a different vibe instead of a win. So it was huge, absolutely massive for him to get the ball away there and keep the Chargers kind of alive for another play instead of taking the negative that the offensive line absolutely wanted to give him, that negative play. But very heads up of Herbert to avoid that sack, avoid a fumble, and get that ball out of there. And then, of course, the second down play where he gets it to McConkey. Again, harassed, switches, the ball into his different hand. It was just a crazy, insane play. That's why you pay him $53 million, right? And so insane effort from Herbert there. Gets it to Ladd. And Ladd has space and blockers too working with him. It was nice to see that effort. Hassan Haskins gets off a nice block after he had already helped Austin Deculus chip, and then he sprints down the field to probably buy Ladd McConkey an extra 10 to 15 yards and make that a more can't miss field goal for the Chargers than it would have been otherwise. Dicker probably makes it either way, but again, heads up play by Haskins today, who deserves credit. You could also tell that the juice was there for the team in terms of Zion. After pass protection, he goes and is sprinting all the way down the field. And so you can tell that they wanted this one. But first and foremost, credit to Justin Herbert, who bailed them out of this situation again. And so Justin Herbert, since 2020, since he came into the league, is second in the league in game-winning drives to only Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes with 19, Herbert with 18. And we've been saying that's the kind of quarterback Justin Herbert is. Unfortunately, until he has a degree of playoff success, the national media won't buy that. Hence why I said I don't know if this is the game that will kickstart a Herbert MVP campaign or something like that. But just from my experience viewing him and again seeing sort of the things that he's able to do really well in these moments, he meets the moment when his number is called. and so it was called again today. He steps up in a very big spot, taking a lot of pressure, a subpar team all around him. I tweeted the Chargers projected starting lineup on Friday, I think, and got a lot of reaction to that tweet. And you could say, yeah, it's the 1-4 Dolphins. They don't have a lot of, talent per se on their roster right now. But again, for Herbert to overcome the circumstances and get one of these games that you ultimately have to win to be a playoff team and take care of business, it says a lot about him. So shout out to Justin, who, even by his own standards, I think that underthrow that he had to Keenan Allen, right, on the drive before the Dolphins scored the touchdown, probably one that he'd like to have back. But again, he got an opportunity and a chance to get that one back, per se. So shout out to Justin for a game that, like I said, is not going to be remembered necessarily from a phenomenal place stats-wise, but absolutely stepped up when his best was needed. Rushing. Kimani Vidal, 18 carries, 124 yards. Broke off a long run of 38, another one of 19 yards where he broke a tackle, 64 yards after contact today, and obviously had the receiving touchdown look that they drew up for him and Hampton kind of the previous week. There was a lot of discussion in this game. Is Haskins RB1? Is Vidal RB1? I probably told my friends that are mad at me in fantasy football about Haskins being the RB1, and so they're mad at me today. I'll live with that because I was pleasantly surprised at their usage of Vidal today. And the thing about Haskins is, giving him credit for the play he just had. He's a guy that I think will have a lot of success, running up the middle. Like, you can give him those short yardage situations. Unfortunately for Haskins, that's the one thing the Chargers offensive line really can't do right now, run blocking wise. And so I think the natural progression and the natural decision by Greg Roman after that is, hey, let's get Kimani in space, let's get him to the outside and pick up yards that way. And that was ultimately the Chargers' game plan. Well-blocked runs, some runs where Vidal was obviously doing some work and picking up yards after contact himself. So this was a great performance, I think, by both backs today, including Naheem Miller-Hines, who we'll get to in a second with kind of his unsung role when we talk about special teams. So, they needed to step up with Hampton and Najee Harris, of course, who was injured weeks ago, out of this one. You could say it was against the 31st ranked rush defense and take credit away from them. But I think for what the expectations of the fan base were for both Vidal, for Haskins, to step up in this moment, I think says a lot about those two guys who have bounced around being the RB3. Kimani's bounced around the practice squad and then been elevated to the main roster and all those kinds of things, particularly after the tough preseason he had where I never sold the stock. You did. But anyway, where I never sold the stock, for him to bounce back after the preseason, he did, or he had. That was viewed as underwhelming by some of the fans where, sorry, he wasn't picking up yards running behind Josh Kaltenberger. I think it was a great step forward for him. He acknowledged he would have liked the preseason to have gone better, but it didn't. He never moped around. He never, kind of had a woe is me attitude about it. He waited until his number would be called again, and it looked like a different number 30 whenever hit the Chargers out there today. So shout out to Kimani Vidal for his performance today, and shout out to Hassan Haskins for kind of taking that unsung blocking role where he was doing a lot of the dirty work today. Receiving. Everyone did pretty well in terms of chipping in. I think early in this game, there was the Minkah Fitzpatrick pass breakup on Ladd McConkey where you're sort of like, he probably could have had that one. And you were sort of like, is Ladd going to really have one of these games again? And Ladd rebounded. He has his first 100-yard game. A lot of that on the 42 yards, but still, I think all around from drive to drive, from quarter to quarter, it was a lot better of a performance for him on the whole. He again had the touchdown with Herbert where they both kind of extended the play, and then of course the sequence with Herbert where he extended the play at the end. It felt like those two were just in much better sync today in terms of being at the right place, being at the right time for one another. And so Ladd and Herbert said it post game, right? Ladd's going to extend the play. it's my job to kind of get the ball to him out in space and let him do what Ladd does. And so that was a nice bounce back game for him after, I think, a rough couple of weeks on the whole for Ladd. Not necessarily in the first few games where he just wasn't seeing the stats. But then, of course, the Giants game was bad by his standards, I would say. So for him to have this effort where it's like, okay, that's Ladd McConkey, right? And no Quentin Johnston. A little bit of a stiffer game for Keenan Allen. They needed Ladd to step up and be the guy. And he answered the bell. Oronde Gadsden, the team's second leading receiver. I get to take another victory lap. Thank you. 7 receptions for 68 yards. Had the fumble early on where he kind of got that ball punched out from him while he was midair. Kind of less of a fumble per se and just more of an unlucky thing that happened to him. So, for his confidence to be shaken like that and for him to go back out there and respond the way he did, I thought was really good. And honestly, I think one of the bigger subplots of this game, looking at the final snap counts and what they ended up being for Conklin, Disley, and Gadsden, this was the first game Conklin kind of got quasi-benched, and they ran with Gadsden as their move tight end. They ran with Disley sort of as, again, their screens guy, their blocking guy. He had the most awesome screen on that one touchdown drive where, it feels like the Chargers kind of he run like Tyler said on the podcast last night. He runs at like 1 mile an hour, but that screen still works every time for God knows what reason. But he's proven that hey, when he's out in space, he can make stuff happen on screens. That leak route he had, the week 1 against the Chiefs, right? I think back to that. So again, he's another guy that when his number's been called, he kind of answers the bell. And so. Want to see more of Disley. Honestly, obviously coming back from the injury and all that kind of stuff. So nice to see the effort from him today. Obviously nice to see the effort from Gadsden. And to me, going forward, the storyline is those are your 2 tight ends, barring injury, going forward. I think you have Gadsden, who is your, prototypical, downfield receiving threat tight end. And then I think you have Disley, who can do a lot of the dirty work and a lot of the screens and the stuff that he was able to do last year. Vidal contributed a little bit in the receiving game with the touchdown. Haskins contributed a little bit. Keandre Lambert-Smith gets his first catch for 1 yard, so that's something. Shout out to Trey Harris, who had 4 catches for 27 yards. A couple, critical catches early in this game, along with Keenan Allen, who picked up some third downs, I think. And so, they kind of, I wouldn't say Keenan was necessarily like at his sharpest today, but again, filling in that role, without Quentin Johnston being their prototypical, downfield guy, it was really just on everybody to kind of make those plays happen and be in the right place, right time for Herbert. I didn't think I would come into this season being like, hey, it's on Keenan Allen and Trey Harris and Ladd McConkey to make up for the hole that they lost in the offense and Quentin Johnston today. But that's the season QJ's had, and other guys, again, like Ladd and really everyone else, stepped up in that regard. So shout out to, a pretty, a game where they didn't necessarily have one guy that they went to, but just a bunch of guys who stepped up for 1, 2, 3, 4 catches, in addition to McConkey and Gadsden, obviously, who led the way on offense. Couple other offensive storylines to talk about. Running back trade, we'll see what happens on that. Ian Rappaport and Mike Garafolo basically both indicated in their reporting that the Chargers are perusing the league for running back at this point and want to get a guy, with Hampton's absence potentially being more extended than originally thought. Mike Garafolo saying he probably will miss something along the lines of more than 4 games in that minimum IR timeline. And, despite Kimani's effort in this game, and Kimani was incredible, obviously, I do still think that you probably trade for a running back, just because I think you need a guy to kind of take the stress off of Kimani and also have a contributor who can be RB2, RB3 with Kimani once Hampton is back. And so, I do still think at the end of the day, they'll go out and probably trade for a guy. Whether that's, I don't think it's like a Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara level situation personally, although I know those are the two names the fan base is probably has been most concentrated on. But I think just getting someone who can be kind of a solid player. I listed a couple guys like Tony Pollard, who I obviously think would have to be under consideration considering how the Titans are doing. Jerome Ford is another one for Cleveland. He's had 2 500-plus yard rushing seasons. He's, again, a very reliable back. Keaton Mitchell would be like kind of a Baltimore project, sort of in the vein of what Tyler and Steven have mentioned. There's a lot of guys. I think Dameon Pierce, fits the scheme. So whatever running back they want to trade for, I think there's a lot of good options of guys that can take some of the stress off of Kimani, be a compliment to him, and then also complement Hampton with Kimani whenever Hampton does return. So I do still think they probably will trade for a running back. I don't know if it's going to be this week or next week or at the trade deadline, but let's see how that plays out. Offensive line. Oh boy. Where do I start? Bradley Bozeman's been really bad this year. Tyler said it has escalated to hate watching in our chat. But a lot of the run game, the reason that the run game isn't executing up the middle is because of him. Got pretty ambushed in the pass game today as well, unfortunately. And it's just a shame because he is one of the starters that you were supposed to be able to rely on, especially at a time when Austin Deculus and Bobby Hart are starting and Mackay started this game. He wasn't great. But, you sort of rely on Bozeman and Zion to kind of have that consistency. And I thought Bozeman was, unfortunately, again, not a great performance today. Deculus and Bobby Hart, listen, I get the Deculus thing because at the end of the day, you don't have Joe Alt, you don't have Pipkins, and you don't have Salyer into this game as a result of injuries, and hopefully you get those guys back down the line. Potentially next game, we'll see. But I get having to play Deculus because, look, you don't have any other options. This is what it's come to injury-wise. Choosing to start a Bobby Hart that has not played in 3 years, however, was a choice. Especially when you have a Foster Sorrell on the roster who's at least been in the NFL more recently than the aforementioned Hart. I can't get behind that decision by Harbaugh and Ortiz. I think it absolutely, damaged the offense today, particularly in that first half, and then they absolutely just had to chip and help. Would you have had to do that with Pipkins, and would you have had to have done that with Salyer too? Yes, but it was worse with Bobby Hart. It absolutely was. And I can't believe going into this game that he was your best option at right tackle. So I've aired all my grievances with the offensive line many times on the show, particularly last week, so I don't necessarily want to keep the mood as a damper, but it is a storyline that, particularly when you play a team that converts more of those sacks than the Dolphins do, we will be talking about, I think, in future weeks. Unfortunately, if the Chargers don't get Alt and Pipkins and Salyer and all those guys back soon. So hopefully, all things considered, the offensive line takes steps next game. What's my level of faith in that? No, it's not particularly high. Let's switch over to the defense, who I think had a mixed bag of a day. Obviously converted some interceptions on Tua from Derwin, from Benjamin St-Juste, from Tony Jefferson after a deflection from Waddle. So, I think in terms of being in the right place at the right time, secondary-wise, outside of a couple plays where they just kind of got burned by Waddle, that was fine. The real thing that you notice on defense, both on tape in these last couple weeks and, again, just before I even watched the tape on, the TV angle in this game, they are getting absolutely cooked run game, trench-wise, on the edge, on the interior, with whenever they're thrown some speed at them, whether that was Bill Krosky-Merritt, whether that was Devon Achane, getting the angles on them today. struggling to like keep some screens and some short passes and some quick game concepts in the backfield too. Did a better job at wrapping up as like the game went on, but there were a couple times where Derwin or Dayon or something like over pursued a little bit like aggressively, and it cost them some yards, certainly on Achan. And so that's an area where, hey, they play Jonathan Taylor next week, so the sledding does not get too much easier over the next couple of weeks in that regard. And so I do think that's an area where you need Dayon, Derwin to play better. They should get Denzel Perriman back next week, so I think that will help some of their run defense problems. He was a full, I think, limited full participant in practice this week, just didn't end up playing and getting activated off of IR, but I assume he'll probably suit up next week just based off of how the practice schedules are. So I think there's hope for it being better with just Derwin and Dayon playing better. Harbaugh mentioned that Derwin is dealing with a wrist injury. Dayon obviously dealt with a pretty serious illness earlier in the season. So like I don't think this is like the baseline level of play to expect from them every game. But considering how locked in they were the first 2 weeks of the season, I would say the downfall sort of being the run game of the defense is surprising now. And Minter's whole defense rests on, hey, can you execute when we have some lighter boxes in there? And if you're, not winning, particularly with the lighter box looks, then that's where the Minter defense kind of fails when players don't execute necessarily the way they should against Achan. Some of this will also be improved when Khalil Mack is back, to be clear, because there were a couple times today where the Chargers just got absolutely, hammered off of the edge where like the Dolphins were just able to like seal off a Boy B, and then you have Achan, like plummeting down for a big gain. So like some of this is related to that, absolutely. But I just think it needs to be a higher level of execution and play ultimately from the run defense compared to what it has been. So that's all I have to say on that. I think Tuli did a pretty good job this game from a pass rushing standpoint, gets a sack onto Odafe Owe, new transaction from the Baltimore Ravens. Suits up in his first game. He has 4 pressures, a stop, a tip pass that ended up being a completion. So he might have helped Tua out a little bit there. But I thought all things at the sack, pressure, stop, it was a pretty good game, I think, for Odafe Owe's debut. And, it makes you excited for, like I mentioned, with Khalil Mack being back, him, Tuli, and Mack, I think, will be a pretty lethal like trio out on the edge when the Chargers are able to put all that together. And so shout out to the New Jersey native, Odafe Owe from Rutgers Prep, who played pretty well in his first game today with the Chargers. I didn't necessarily get a chance to get on here and like talk about the trade, but I did feel like this was a necessary trade considering what you were getting from Bud Dupree, what you were getting from Caleb Murphy. And so I think Owe showed, even against a team like the Dolphins, who are a ton of quick passing concepts, and Tua getting the ball out really quickly, showed why he's pretty valuable to this team, especially against some of the more drop back oriented quarterbacks they'll play. Odafe Owe is going to be a huge part of the game plan. I thought Mickens looked pretty solid today in the limited kind of snaps that he had, although he did miss a tackle that led to the big Achan touchdown run. But outside of that, I thought he looked pretty okay. Again, not necessarily any like individual egregious performances on defense, but just the execution needing to be kind of better across the board. Shout out to special teams. I came on this podcast the last 2 weeks, particularly against the Commanders game, and was just like, man, special teams is fucking ass. And I apologize, special teams. I was not familiar with Ryan Ficken's game, although I was familiar with Ryan Ficken's game, but he just needed a couple weeks to get it together. Cameron Dicker, 5 for 5. He had a 58-yard field goal taken off of the board and replaced with a 35-yard field goal. And so, Dicker, again, is one of the most secure players in the league when it comes to doing what he does. Shout out to J.K. Scott, too, who, obviously didn't punt a ton today, but landed 2 punts inside of the 20, average of 47 yards per punt, and a sneaky sneaky, massive play where Rick Lovato actually had a pretty bad snap, but this was on the game-winning field goal attempt, by the way. J.K. Scott's able to redirect that ball, put it right down for Cameron Dicker, a play that, otherwise with a worse performance by J.K. Scott there or a different holder might have resulted legitimately in a fumble, some disaster scenario. And again, we're talking about a much different performance, but I caught that on the live broadcast and just rewatched it on all 22. And he absolutely, J.K. Scott, makes that Rick Lovato snap work, which not to poop on two-time Eagles Super Bowl champion Rick Lovato, but I do think his performance has been pretty underwhelming to this point. Again, that's what happens when you get a replacement level long snapper to sub in for Josh Harris, who's one of the best in the league. So hopefully Josh Harris is able to practice and get back to you. And the Chargers did designate him for return, so he'll be back at some point. But shout out to J.K. Scott, shout out to Cam Dicker, and then shout out to, obviously, Nyheim Miller-Hines, who comes off of the practice squad, has a big 40-yard return that sets up the final drive, of course. And, it's sort of, for those of us who watch the preseason, we're like, don't fumble it. You're doing a pretty good job kick returning, but don't fumble and you're fine. And he did a really good job today. And frankly, based off of what I saw today, I'd like to see, Nyheim Miller-Hines. I hope the statement doesn't come back to bite me, but I hope Nyheim Miller-Hines gets a couple more looks, off of the practice squad and see what he can do, particularly in that kick return game, at the very least until Darius Davis is back healthy, at the very least until this, special teams return game is a little stabilized. I thought he looked good today. Obviously I think the Chargers' plan was to try to get the ball to him as opposed to KLS, who had a couple struggling return games where he was getting targeted by some other teams, but Miller-Hines stepped up today. Now, KLS, speaking of him, had one return for 34 yards. That was actually pretty solid himself. So shout out to him as well for, improving his special teams game a little bit from what we had seen in the last couple of weeks. And it was overall much better effort on special teams from Ryan Ficken's group, who I think had a tough go of things recently. Not necessarily in a way that made me lose faith in Ficken or anything like that, but just needed to be better execution-wise. And kind of like I said last podcast, when you're dealing with as many injuries as the Chargers are dealing with, when you're dealing with the defensive struggles with some of the tackling at this point, I do think that is a big advantage to get the special teams going in the right direction. Again, not necessarily saying everything was perfect this game, but it was definitely better. I think offensive thoughts, just to kind of wrap it up here. Again, Herbert bails them out. We'll see if they trade for a running back, but obviously love what I saw from Kimani Vidal today. Hopefully you get Quentin Johnson back next game from a receiving standpoint. And ultimately things look pretty good, as long as you can get Joe Alt back within the next 2 weeks, because that situation is pretty dire. There's no sugarcoating that one. Interior offensive line, I thought Zion played fine. Bradley Bozeman, still pretty underwhelming, unfortunately. You definitely wanted to see a better game from him today in terms of bouncing back. Mekhi Becton, I also thought had a pretty rough game, unfortunately, all things considered. And then Bobby Hart, I hope he's not playing tackle next week. That's about it. Offensively, defensively, I think the Chargers will lock in at some point and get better games from Derwin, when he's presumably healthier, and better get games from Dayon when it matters too. But the defense has not been at the level that they've needed to be over the last few weeks, and I think that's fair to say in terms of the tackling effort. That's where particularly Derwin needs to be better. I think he's up to 17% missed tackles this year, not including yesterday's game. He was at 9.2% last year. So that's definitely something you want to see just kind of improve. Once they get Mac back, I think the run game will look better and they'll be able to kind of stabilize themselves. But for now, I did think it was a pretty up and down performance for the defense. But shout out to Thule, shout out to Odafe Owe, and shout out to the three guys who got picks today as well. Derwin sealing it. And of course, shout out to Unk, as always, and the Frenchman, Benjamin St. Just. I have no idea if he's French or not. That just name just sounds French, so I just said it. And special teams. Shout out to special teams, like I said. Again, game that the Chargers needed to win. They got the win. Pretty huge, all things considered, to be 4-0 in the AFC and stay in playoff positioning. I think there was a stat that said out there if they lost this game today, they would be about 50% in terms of odds to make the playoffs. So they still remain around 70, around where they were. Regardless of whether they win the division or not, too, this is a huge thing come, potential wild card seeding time, all of that kind of stuff. So they needed to get this game, not just for, obviously, standings and what I just talked about, but from a mental standpoint, too, to kind of get the monkey off their back and be like, okay, we can execute when it matters, and, we can also flush some of the negative things down in this game and hope to improve on those for next week as well. But that will do it for me today. Shout out to the Chargers. Shout out to the Bolt fam for getting it done. So a decent amount of Chargers fans in the stands there in Miami on a very humid day. So shout out to everyone there. God bless Kimani Vidal. God bless Oronde Gadsden. God bless Justin Herbert. Fuck the Miami Dolphins. Tua's not as good as Herbert. We already knew that. Fuck Mike McDaniel. Wear your pants down to your ankles, man. It looks just terrible. The picture of him and Jim Harbaugh next together, don't want to be coach guy, but professionalism guy, but two different levels of seriousness, a little bit there as a head coach. And praise Dan Marino, his pizza actually in Florida. If you get a chance to check out Anthony's Coal-Fired Pizza, very solid. But anyway, Chargers beat the Dolphins. And take advantage of this opportunity. See you guys next time. Bolt up, as always, signing off. Peace.